Well, I better start as Dan would have started before he tells a story. He's got to get his voice into the proper tune to get the radio voice, get the right resonance. Well, okay. We were living on Briar Place. I think the address might have been like 417 or 421, something like that. Briar Place in Chicago, right west of Sheridan Road, was it, or Avenue? Can't remember which. Sheridan Road.
As I recall, then he'd throw in a sometimes called Briar Patch Place.
Oh yes, yeah. That Dan nicknamed it Briar Patch Place. And it was a home of course, number one, Dan Nilles, and far behind, number two, Dan Wagers, and then we had Myrtle the gerbil, and he had another gerbil, and I can't remember, George or something like that, and they were in his room, and Dan had set up 2 aquariums. He had the tropical fish, and I had the wild fish, and I mean they were wild. Somebody, neighbor gal, gave us a couple of bullheads. They were about 1 1/4 inches long when we got them, and one of them jumped out of the bucket right away, and that was the end of him. And so we put the other one in the wild fish tank in my bedroom, and we had he had gotten some sunfish. And sunfish, and what are the ones that are really colorful, or are they the sunfish?
Yeah,
Bluegills, sunfish? Yeah. Well, I think these were sunfish. So we had sunfish and this bullhead, which started growing right away. And we would go to the bait shop and buy minnows for the bullhead. And he really put on the pounds. And he went from 1.5 inches to about 9 inches long there in a year's time or so. He got pretty fat too, but he was keeping me awake at nights. He would change or he'd chase the minnows at night. He fed at night. He'd be splashing around in there, and he'd hit the top of the cover in the aquarium, and got up to be about maybe 10, 11 inches long, and so I told Dan, I said, well, we better put him in the frame, put him in the one of those ponds in the parks off of Lake Michigan there. And then we got to thinking about that and decided that wouldn't be a good idea because everybody fishes there, and the bullhead, well, he didn't have any street smarts, and he'd bite at the first hook that came his way. So we decided we'd sneak him into the shed aquarium, which was down near south side of Chicago along the lake, and the building itself looked like the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. Huge columns, and they had about 25 steps that leading up to the entranceway. And so we decided we were going to do it that spring, and what we'd do is put him in a couple of heavy bags, plastic bags, under a trench coat, and we'd walk in, and there was a big circular pond on the entrance there, and the pond was down 1 floor, so there was a railing around there, and you could see the pond, and people would look at the fish swimming around there, and so we didn't think they would take the fish. So we didn't ask, never thought that far ahead. And so one thing after another in the spring of the year, one of us was busy, and then usually it was Dan, he had something going on. And so I told him, I said, we got to do it, man, the weather's getting warm. Yeah, well, we're going to do it this weekend. And then that weekend, something came up, it was more important. So the next weekend it was really hot and humid. I said, this is it. Let's do it first thing in the morning so it's cooler. you don't look like a weirdo wearing your trench coat. And so he said, yeah, okay. And he was dating a gal by the name of Sororia. Then she was from Persia. So I said, I'll meet you down there, because he said he had to stop by Sororia's house. And and my last words were, like they would really mean something to him, don't be late. Well, so I get down there and I'm sitting out there in the sun up towards the top of the stairs and watching. There's a million little kids running up and down the stairs. I was watching the kids play, and after about 15 minutes, a security guard came out and he said, can I help you? And I said, no, not really. I said, I'm just waiting for a friend here. He's running a little late, I guess. I think the security guard was a little concerned that I was paying too much attention to the kids. And so I assured him that I wasn't.
Smart security guy.
Yeah.
Ahead of his time.
And so I asked him, I said, does anybody ever donate fish here?
No.
Oh, yeah, he says, all the time. I said, well, my friend I'm waiting for, we've got a fish we want to donate. Well, he says, come on with me. He says, the director of the aquarium's here, and I'll introduce you to him. So we went into his office there, and I chatted with the guy for 5 minutes. And yeah, he says, well, when your friend shows up, why, come on in. I'll be in here for a couple more hours, and we'll put the fish in a tank, and then I'll give you a tour of the back side of the place where you can see what's going on from the other side of the viewing rooms. So I went back out and waited about another 45 minutes. Finally, why, here's Dan. He rolls up. He's about 2 hours late, and he had a Camaro, a red Camaro, and I can't remember. I think the parking lot was across Michigan Avenue.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there, and he sees me. He stopped. He hasn't parked yet, and I wave at him, and he waves. And I said, leave the fish in the bucket. Leave the fish in the bucket. Yeah, okay. Waves at me. So I wasn't paying attention, and all of a sudden he shows up at the base of the stairs, and he's walking all hunched over, and he's got a pair of his dad's. It was too hot. He couldn't wear the trench coat. Got a pair of his dad's really baggy, and I mean baggy and full, cotton pants on. They were tan. So I looked at him and I said, what's wrong with your back? Nothing wrong with my back. I said, well, why you all walking hunched over? He said, you know damn well why I'm walking hunched over. He had the fish, in his pants in 2 Ziploc plastic bags. And I said, well, get him out. And, I said, we can donate him, They said, give us a tour. And, yeah, I'll do it inside. Not in front of all these people. And so we started up at about the 7th step that he took up those stairs. This fish got spooked and, threw his spikes out, ripped the bag, and water goes gushing out, running down both legs of his pants from his crotch. And Dan is screaming to high heaven, and clawing at his crotch, And I was laughing so hard I fell down. And I said, for Christ's sake, get that fish out of your pants before you get arrested for being an oversexed spastic. And he's screaming. I said, it's hard. I said, quiet. So he unzipped his pants and pulled the thrashing fish out. We get up, and his pants were just soaked, man. He really looked awful. And so we went in and explained things to the director of the aquarium, and he got a big laugh out of it. And he said, chatted for a minute, and I said, well, we better get the fish in some water. You know, he's been out of the water. Oh, they're real tough. So we go back and go to some sort of a tank. It wasn't that tall at all. It was actually made out of wood, and it might have been 12 inches tall and 4 feet wide and probably 25 feet long. So we put the fish in that, and right away he started swimming, and he swam away real fast. And then you could see him turn around, and he came up back, and then he put his head out of the water and looked at us and blinked his eyes, and then went back in and took off. So that was the end of the bullhead for us. And then the director was going to take us on a tour. So in the shed aquarium at that time, on the viewing platform, they had these huge windows, and they must have been maybe 8 foot tall and 12 foot long or 15 foot long, something like that, where you're looking in the depth of the tank. And so you could get a real good shot at the fish. So we get in the back there, and the back of these tanks, why there was a curb about 6 inches high that went around, and it was all cement there, and they had some steel angled bracing that would hold them the wall up, and it terminated behind the tanks, but at an angle, as it went from the top of the wall down into anchor into the cement. So the guy's pointing out what the various fish are, and he says, well, there's piranhas in here. So Dan thought he would give everybody in the viewing audience a view, scare them or so. So he puts his arms down there as far as he can go and thrashes it around, and so the people would see this. And the guy from the aquarium said, "Look out, get your hands out of there." He says, "I see the fish." He says, "Yeah, but there's some that lay back in the shadows, don't do that, So Dan pulled his hand out, and the very next tank was a dolphin. And so there was a ball there that was floating around in the tank, and the dolphin would kick the ball out to you, and then you'd throw it, and the dolphin would play with it and then bounce it back to you. So Dan took and got the ball, held it with one big hand, and shoved it down in the water all the way. And the dolphin had never experienced this, apparently. And he got real excited, and he shot up, and this out about 3 feet or 4 feet out of the water where Dan was, and Dan was he was down on his haunches. Well, it scared Dan, and he stood up and tripped over this steel girder that was behind him, separating him from the piranha pool, and he fell over the girder and down onto the curb, and damn near went in the pool. One hand went in there, and he caught himself on the curb with the other hand. And the guy says, "You guys are worse than 10-year-old kids." So I said, "It's not me." So we finished the tour and took off to go home and talk about it over a cup of coffee.